For the first time in, well, any time I know of, Kings Island's actually open for the second weekend in November. But why and where did those days come from? Hello, everybody. Alongside Don Helbig, I'm Ryan Sir, and this is Tower Topics.
Tower Topics is a podcast by Kings Island fans for Kings Island fans, because that's who we are and that's who we care about. It's available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Be sure to hit that subscribe button.
Let's kick this off by thanking our Prestige members. I'm going to give a big shout out to Miss Mandy, 1983, Lil Mac, 21, Brian Hauser, 330T, Logan Lipper, Aaron Board, Jacob Fix, Damon Barnes, Dakota Cole, Eric Grau, Dustin Jackson, Songster Smiku, Lack Ray, Galaxy B-Boy, Medic 302, Eastern Coaster, guys and girls, Justin Y, and Mike Garrett. Thank you guys so much for supporting Tower Topics at the highest level. That's the Prestige level. If you want to be involved in Tower Topics, there's a link in the description. Members get early access to the videos, exclusive content, exclusive live streams, and some tiers you can get some free stuff. So hit that link if you're interested.
So Ryan, it came to a surprise, as to many. The park didn't really, put this out there. We're just kind of quietly added to their calendar. November 8th and 9th. That's a Saturday, Sunday. Open from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. Usually, the park closes at the end of October if it's open the first week in November, and you find that those next, couple of weekends, the weather's usually pretty nice. So this is a nice bonus for pass holders. Don't know really what's going to be open. You're kind of in that transition between, haunt ending and having to clean all that up, and trying to get ready for Winterfest. That Saturday and Sunday was often a very important day in trying to get that transition done and getting the park cleaned up. So you're going to have to hold off a couple of days there. So a little added pressure to operations and maintenance and everybody there. But what was your first thoughts when you heard now open November 8th and 9th?
You want my honest answer?
I do.
This was a mistake, and it'll be corrected within the hour. That was my honest thought. I couldn't fathom them doing that. But when we talk about, this is another situation where you ask, like, well, why isn't the park open between Haunt and Winterfest? And you'll get a lot of the park apologists and probably people within the park that it's like, well, they've got to get these rides ready and Winterfest ready and stuff.
They do.
It's like, well, Carowinds and King's Dominion did it. They had their peanut celebration those weekends. So it is possible. But the question, though, is being open 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. That's November 8th and 9th, 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., which is kind of odd hours. I guess it's kind of like Sunday hours when Haunt isn't there. But why? Why would they do that?
And where did the dates come from? Because it's not like they sat there in Charlotte and said, hey, let's reward our pass holders with these extra weekends. It had to come from somewhere. And if, you follow this podcast, you follow Six Flags, that fall events at several parks were canceled. Michigan's Adventure, their whole Halloween season canceled. King's Dominion, Winterfest canceled, so that left a lot of dates that they previously had been open at parks in the chain, now closed. So you roll a couple of those to some of the parks that perform a little bit better, than some of those parks that had their events closed or canceled. And, Kings Island is, heavy season pass base, normally does very well, in the fall months, September, October with the crowds that they draw on that. So Kings Island is a very good park, to add a couple of dates to. You would think Cedar Point, might still be warm enough to do that. I don't know, I haven't looked at their calendar, but Carowinds, is a park that, could add these extra dates and that. So, where you can, the parks that draw well, you want to try to fill your calendar, and remove some of those softer dates, whether it's from a Michigan's Adventure, or even if it's Kings Island, that you put these dates here now. And does that mean, in a couple of weeks, we're going to see that one of those Thursday night haunts or all the Thursday night haunts get pulled or Sunday night haunt gets pulled? It's going to come from somewhere if it hasn't already, from elsewhere in the chain that, it's always addition by subtraction, when you see these kind of things. So they did subtract from the other parks, rolled it over to Kings Island right now, but I would not be surprised if we see a haunt night or two, removed, whether it's the Thursdays or the Sundays from Kings Island's calendars to, kind of make way for these two dates that were added.
Yeah. I, in my heart of heart, I hope these dates came from Michigan's Adventure or King's Dominion for Winterfest, but it does seem like it's an odd dynamic. When we talk about, and you and I had an extensive conversation about this the last show, and even off air. But you talk about the most penetrated park and stuff. It seems like a lot of these things where corporate is flexing their muscle and adding these days, whether it's Thursdays for Haunt, Sundays for Haunt, or these 11 to 7s on November 8th and 9th. Kings Island is adding when other parks are subtracting. That's what it at least seems like on the surface, and that's such an odd feeling. Where it felt like Kings Island would always get kind of the second best thing. We've talked about that at length, but it seems like a more robust operating calendar is something that they see as very beneficial to Kings Island.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting. Yeah, it's going to be interesting these 2 days, Ryan, too, to see what rides are in fact open. Is it the full park, as guests would come to expect? Is it maybe some of the coasters aren't running? They've already started the Winterfest, the winter maintenance on some of them, and already have them closed. Are the restaurants, will all of them be open, or just some of them? So it's going to be interesting to see what those days look like in terms of what the offering is. So there's no special events, planned right now. That would be something where you would think, if it's successful on those 2 days and it becomes something that they look to do in future years to make sure that it's open, till mid-November, do they do something? Peanut Celebration, you mentioned the other parks had, something like that. But also you look at it and, is it a test? If people are coming out in November, could we extend it, all the weekends in November, and maybe do this instead of Winterfest in 2026? You got to think about those kind of things, because if this draws very well, maybe that's more profitable for them, than putting up all the lights and hiring all the different, entertainment and everything else that goes into Winterfest. You just do this, you end up, it's the way the company is structured. It's all about, revenue, making money in that. If you're going to make more money doing this than Winterfest, why wouldn't you do that? So there's all kinds of things to look at, so if you go to those 2 days, maybe you're helping the park make a decision, for next year, what they do. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's a tough one, because my heart says support them with this and make sure you go, but my head says, if this is a test to have 11 to 7s in November and then no Winterfest, which is kind of what King's Dominion's doing, maybe you shouldn't attend that.
Exactly.
Winterfest is going to be at risk no matter what. I think that whether or not they have Winterfest in 2026, which still very much remains to be seen, I think this might be a moving part that's semi-independent of that. I don't think that they're going to be crazy enough to try to market it as, now we got rid of Winterfest, but we added some 11 to 7s in November with half the rides open. I don't think that even they would be dumb enough to try to communicate that message.
Yeah, and I want to look at this too. Like, I'm going to put myself in the shoes of a Kings Island, say, maintenance person, and say one of the things that you do every year is, you tear down, strip down the beast to every last nut and bolt, and you rebuild it. And it's, you bank on the the last weekend in October, maybe the first weekend in November, when the park ends the Halloween season, and you get started that next morning bright and early. You're removing the trains, you're getting them over to the maintenance shop, you begin tearing them down, and it takes 4.5 months to complete that process for those 3 trains. So if all 3 trains are going to be running on November 8th and 9th, that puts them a week behind schedule. Now, that might not seem like a lot, we can make that up, but it is, because it's a really tight turnaround to get those trains ready to go for the next season. So I would not be surprised on November 8th and 9th if you see the beast with 2 train operation. At least they get a jump on 1 train. You're gonna have to do something.
I think
like
that would be forgivable.
I think that's but you're gonna have to do something. Yeah, they're gonna have to do something like that, or it really puts, and you're not just talking about that ride. There's other rides in the park that, do you start to take a train off Mystic Timbers at that time, or is it going to be all three trains November 8th and 9th? The racer, we know what they did for Winterfest. There was one train on each side. You already get a jump on that, so, I don't think you can possibly have the full park operation. And what I mean by that is not all the rides, but just all the vehicles. Do they cut it down to where there's two trains on the Beast? There's two on Mystic Timber. There's one on each side of the racer that weekend of November 8th and 9th, because if they don't do that, they're really, putting maintenance in a tough spot to have everything ready to go if they have a mid-April opening next year.
There's the possibility that it could be what they call an Indian summer, where this is still fall technically, but it's supposed to be cold, but it happens to be 80 degrees, and they could draw, 25,000 people. I think the reality is, especially with the fact that there's, back in the day when they had boots on the ground, there would be a big campaign, and they'd probably, like back in the day, when there was a marketing team at Kings Island, you guys would probably have something going on those days to draw attention to them. They're not going to have that. It's just going to be a matter of people checking the calendar or seeing it on social media. I don't think they're going to be very busy at all. So I think the proper course of action would be, and the good compromise with maintenance would be, pull one of the trains from Mystic, pull one of the trains from Beast, maybe even some of the flat rides that aren't as popular, like let's start the rehab now. I don't think you're
gonna have to, because like I said, I'm thinking about them and knowing how involved the work is during the off-season months. They have everything ready to go come April, and I don't think that that ever gets considered when they're adding these dates, and that I don't think anybody sits there that now makes these decisions and goes, okay, what about maintenance? How's that going to impact us? And sometimes it's all about your people. You want to make sure that you're not putting them in a spot too where their backs are to the wall to get everything ready to go for the start of next season, just because the season got extended. Their time to get everything done doesn't get extended. So that's just something, just from being on the inside, working at the park, and all the work that gets involved. I think about those people all the time. Whenever decisions are made, like, who does this impact? I think about that kind of stuff.
Well, and the thing that stinks is the logical thing is, well, if it's not ready, it's not ready. So we'll start with two trains on the Beast the first weekend or whatever. But it's not uncommon for Kings Island to be extraordinarily busy opening weekend. So it would put them at a pretty big disadvantage, especially a lot of the people that are buying these passes at the reduced prices. Maybe it's their first time visiting in a long time on opening day. They just don't have that option. But
no.
Yeah, I think what's ultimately going to suffer is next season. The first.
Yeah, and you and I last year, when they decided to run the racer during Winterfest, it was two train operation, but we talked about it on Tower Topics that there's no way they're going to have all four trains ready to go when the park opens in April, and they didn't. It took a couple of weekends before they were back up to four train operation. So, like I said, it's just from having worked with and closely with the maintenance teams, and that just those are the kind of things that go through my mind whenever I see, oh, they added dates. Okay, who does this impact? At the park, by doing that. But I think it's great if you're a guest or a pass holder. You get those 2 extra days to come out and, get some rides in. If the weather's nice, it's a perfect time of year, to go. And, you'll get a chance to see the park in that transition between Haunt and Winterfest. Although nowadays, though, the last couple of weeks of Haunt, you start to see that transition taking place. You start to see the fountain, isn't like that last weekend, isn't what it is right now for Haunt. They start to put the ice rink in, so you're going to see different things like that, so maybe they speed that up by a weekend and just have more Winterfest stuff out. So it's like worlds collide at that time of the year between Haunt and Winterfest. And you probably see, kind of that, that tear down phase where some things are still out and about, and maybe some things are, stacked up in a pile somewhere, off to the side in the grass or off to the side of the midway or something when they're open these 2 days, November 8th and the 9th.
Yeah. There's going to be some sort of sacrifice where the magic gets killed a little bit, I'm sure. one thing I will hand to them is that the first year or so that we had Winterfest, we lost the fountain about a weekend in.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's just the last weekend, I think. And then same with putting up the Eiffel Tower Christmas tree. That took them forever the first time. And now it's like,
it's pretty quick.
I want to say last year they didn't have it up for the closing of Haunt, but they put it up like the next day. It takes about a day for them to do it now, which shows just like, they get the system down and they know what they're doing, and they get these things together. Because I remember the Christmas tree was like half built for a week or so.
Yeah, there's already a lot of the lights now stay up on the trees and that throughout the season, so it's just a matter of going through and checking them and making sure that they work and all that. So you're not starting everything from scratch every year that they did. 2017, and then 2018-19, there were still a lot of things that they would start from the beginning, but now they just kind of leave a lot of that stuff out. Some of it's hidden. You don't really get to see it too much during the summer months, but if you look closely, it's there.
You got to be looking for it, but it is always there. Now, that's one of the things that I kind of noticed that kind of gives me a little bit of hope for Winterfest, because I don't buy for a second when you get the park apologists that, give the line of, it's all season pass holders, blah, blah, blah. If money wasn't made during Winterfest, they wouldn't do it. It's not like in the 80s when it was like a gift to the community. They've always been a publicly traded I would say they can get away with it now more so than when it was just Cedar Fair, because, one park reflects a much smaller part of the portfolio. But I think that the reason why Winterfest is always at risk, especially in places like maybe New Jersey, is that although it is profitable, it's profitable under decent conditions. And all you need to have is the first 3 weekends to be rained out or snowed out or something like that. And then you're underwater, and they can't afford to short-term have those kind of issues.
No, that is spot on there, Ryan, with that. It's such a short season that every night counts. You kind of bank in there, you're going to have 2 or 3 nighs where it's either going to be too cold or there's rain or, just for some reason that they have to close. But overall, if it is a winter season where it's, 18 degrees, most nights, they're not going to do well, so it's such an unpredictable time of the year. And that's one of the things that, always was a concern with Winterfest is, okay, what's the weather going to be like, this year? It looks like for the start of the haunt season, the weather's going to be pretty good.
Going to be hot.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty good. So that should bode well for, good turnouts then. But when it's like that in October, September, October, historically it's a lot of cold and rain and snow and that you get end of November, December too. So that's something to always keep in mind.
So I always have this adage that's usually true, where if it's a hot summer, it ends up being a cold winter. I do not know what this winter is going to be like, because we had so many 100+ degree days during the summer. But as you recall, we also were wearing like coats at Holiday World on Memorial Day. So maybe it'll be a decent winter this year.
It was chill. It was chilly at Holiday World
it was hoodie weather. We didn't get in the go swimming or anything because
I had my my normal attire. It was cool. I didn't feel like I was cold or anything. But yeah, I remember you had the hoodie and other people had sweatshirts and that, were wearing those at the event. But it wasn't terrible. It wasn't like it was 40 degrees.
It wasn't like you could see your breath, but it was actually very pleasant, because the last time I did Hollywood Nights, which is, I think it's always Memorial Day weekend or the weekend after or something. Was it Memorial Day week? It was Memorial Day weekend.
It was right after. It was the 30th and 31st, I think, this year.
All right.
May 30th and 31st.
Typically speaking, it's so hot that weekend when they do it. So I'd much rather have it so it was like pleasant during the day and kind of crisp at night. That was so nice. It felt like fall weather. It was really nice. But anyway, let's circle back. Let us know in the comments. We discussed, if they have the option of being open through November on weekends, would you sacrifice Winterfest for that? That's a big question there. That's a big trade-off, because you get more rides being open through November, but you sacrifice the entire Winterfest season, including my favorite day of the year, New Year's Eve. So we'd love to know in the comments below. Don, let's move on to a segment we like to call Buy or Sell.
All right.
Buy or sell. Phantom Theater opening nightmare will open with the park in the spring, breaking a recent year's trend of KI and other Six Flags parks of a new ride not opening until June or later. Buy or sell?
I'm going to buy. I believe that it'll be ready to go when the park opens, whether that's mid-April, whenever they open. It wouldn't surprise me if they waited till the first weekend in May to open. But yeah, I think Phantom Theater will break that trend in recent years of things not opening until mid-June or whatever it's been. We saw Adventureport, Snoopy Soapbox Racers didn't open until June. So yeah, I think that when the park opens for the season, Phantom Theater opening nightmare will be ready to go.
I think so too, and there's evidence that they are moving on it. Jim Flugel from the Kings Island Season Pass Holder Group posted a photo from the Eiffel Tower from this past weekend of the vehicles, the ride vehicles from Boo Blasters that are all on the stage for Timberwolf, which I wouldn't use that as an indication that they're getting new vehicles. In fact, it's quite the contrary, but I do believe that they removed them to have them out of the way.
Well, those all came out anyway because of off-season maintenance on those, so they weren't just always sitting in there, so it was something that they did every year.
Well, I've never seen them packed away like that. They took out the vehicles every year.
They do maintenance on, yeah. You would see those, come out and maintenance would work on them and put them back in.
Well, nonetheless, them being out as well. I guess you can only see them now because normally it's open during Winterfest, so that's why you never saw them parked outside. But
I was told that they were going to start working on, what September 1st was the last day for Boo Blasters. That the next morning, they were going to start, taking things out and getting ready for the refurbishment and the transformation into Phantom Theater opening nightmare. So not surprised to see the picture by Jim, that things were over there.
Yeah. I mean, what that tells me, regardless of off-season rehab, is that those are all pulled out so they can bring in forklifts and things like that, like the heavy machinery that they need to do these sorts of things. Now, will the ride be reoriented? Will the ride system be the same? Like, we just don't know a lot of those things. The ride vehicles in the picture look a heck of a lot like the old ones, which I don't think is a big deal because it's the original Phantom Theater ones anyway. I hope they replace the guns with the flashlights rather than the stupid guns they have now that barely work. I think they will. I know Sally's has a product like that is a flashlight. But I agree. I'm going to buy. I think it's going to open with the park, and I'm super excited for that. All right. We'll be right back with the listener questions. First listener question, Braden from Owensboro, Kentucky, said, the monster has yet to be rebuilt at Kings Island, though Kings Island had declared that the part it needed was arriving in July, and it would be back up and running. Looks like they lied to the public. Do you think it will be retired and they say nothing as has become a Six Flags thing? So basically in vain with the other Six Flags ride retirements, do you think that they'll retire the monster? And
I do not think it'll be retired. I have hope that it's going to be back next year. It would be kind of sad to see it go, but I don't think so. I just think that, for a variety of reasons that they just, didn't put it back together. So, this year. So I'm saying that it won't be retired.
I don't think it'll be retired either. But if you look at the sequence of events, they said that the part would arrive in July. They never said the part. Yeah, they never said it would reopen in July. I hate to split hairs, but that's their process, I'm sure. It arrived in July, and then it sat on a pallet somewhere backstage. Then we found out through our sources that it needed to be modified. They're working on that. Well, ever since we found that out, then we've seen stuff move around. Like, I think they painted the base of the monster, like they had that covered up and stuff. We've seen action in the monster thing. They might actually reopen it for Winterfest this year. I think that's entirely possible. And the cool part is if they open it for Winterfest, they might be able to have all the rehab done. So all they have to do is shut it down and, do their stuff. I mean, I don't know how much they would have to do to protect it from the elements in the winter, but they might be able to just restart it in the fall and it would save them that amount of time. I don't know. Jet from Peoria, Illinois said, "Loved our topics, Ryan and Don. I've never been to Kings Island before stumbling across this podcast over the winter, but I went in August and had a great time with my kids. We'll be back next year." Now for my question. Don, you mentioned how many times you've ridden certain rides. How do you keep track of them in the days before apps?
That was, pretty easy to do. We go back to dating back to my first ever visit to Kings Island. They would have the park guide and map that they would give you. It was like a little handbook. And then later years, it was just kind of more of the full blown map that had become, what everybody became accustomed to. But what I would do, I would, on the map, when I would get one of those, I would put the date on my visit. And, we mentioned the monster of the ride before. So if I rode that twice, over the monster on the map, I put a 2. Or in the listing of, the rides in each area, it would say like the Coney Island section, back in the 70s and 80s before they changed it to Coney Mall. They would list out, all the rides that you could do in each area. I would, if it wasn't going to be marked on the map, I would go to where, the monster, and I would put a 2. Or if I rode the racer 17 times on that day, I'd put a 17 or a 64, whatever that number was. I'd put it next to that ride on the map. And that was my tracking device, for so many years, was just marking the park map. And I did that all the way through, ride 10,000. So a lot of the rides, it was easy to keep track, there'd be 1 or 2 for most of the rides on any given day. Racer was a little bit different because there was, high number days in that. So to keep track, I would have, I'd make like the little, stick figures on my hand. And there was an article in 1982 where it showed me doing that, like marking it was in, I don't know, Hamilton Journal or something like that, where they showed a picture of me getting off the ride and taking my pen out and putting a mark on my hand, and you would have, 4 little lines, and then you put the slash to it for 5. And on some days I had it looked like I had my tattoo on my arm or something with those kind of things, the stick figures. But that's how I kept track, the park map. And I just, would, after the day was over, just, throw it in the back seat or the glove compartment or something like that. They would stack up during the season, end of the year. You take those out, you would just, hand whatever those notepads, the kind of the yellow type paper, color paper, whatever, you'd have those for school and that. But I would just take that and just kind of go back through and write down the date and, how many times I did all the different rides. And I still have a lot of those handwritten. I still have a lot of the maps, but I still have a lot of the handwritten, all the handwritten ones from, those years in the 80s and that showed the date, how many times I rode, what my average per day was, up to that point on the racer and the beast. And so, it was a crude way to keep track of everything. There wasn't any, like you mentioned, the apps and all that you have now that you can track your rides, but that's just how it was done.
Right. Jim from Columbus, Ohio said, "I live midway between Kings Island and Cedar Point. Which park should I consider my home park? I visit each about equal numbers of times each year. I think Cedar Point has the better shows, but Kings Island has the better food. Roller coasters, let's not kid ourselves. That's Cedar Point."
All right, you live halfway between. I don't think, there's no way that, one or the other, just because of your location, is going to be, said to be your home park. I just think it's the one that you want to consider your home park. Maybe where your pass was processed, that's going to be designated as a home park one way or the other, wherever you process your pass. But, I don't know. It's whichever one you feel, which one did you visit first? Which one do you like better? I don't know. I mean, it's your call. What one is your home park?
Whichever one feels like home to you. I mean, that's my favorite thing about Kings Island is it feels like home. So that's why, I mean, is it my favorite park? I mean, in some regards, yes, but in a lot of regards, no. But I would never consider, Cedar Point. I also like Cedar Point, but it would never be my home park because it feels like I'm a visitor there. It doesn't feel like home, So I would say whichever one you have that emotional connection to would be the one that
Right.
you would do that. But
yeah, but that's a nice location to be, halfway between both. It's 2 hours this way, 2 hours that way. That would be the ideal situation if you're a big fan of both parks.
Yeah, seen the good Scene 75 up there in Columbus too. It's a 2-floor Scene 75 with a roller coaster and a drop tower. You can get your fix in the winter there. That's a good place to be. But if you got your own questions, send them to host, HOSTS, at towertopics.com. That's host at towertopics.com. Your first name, the city you're from, as well as your question, comment, concern, buy or sell, anything like that. You don't want to do that? You can send us a text or a voicemail, 513-399-7538. That's 513-399-7538. If you send us a text, we'll read it just like we did these. If you send us a voicemail, we might play the recording on the air and react to it. So we'd love to hear these things.
And if you're a fan of Tower Topics, join the Facebook group. Just search Tower Topics on Facebook. You'll find the group. And we'd love to have you there. There's a lot of good conversations going on. It's a good place to post about your visits. If you have any tips, recommendations for other Kings Island fans, we're trying to build a community, the camaraderie and things. We, do different meetups and that. It'll be a good way to communicate there. We'll eventually get to the point to where we'll do some lives in that through the Facebook group. So, look it up and join. We'd love to have you there.
New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Merch shop coming soon. I'm Ryan Sir along with Don Helbig, and this is Tower Topics.